Welcome back to science class. My name is Miss Rillieux, and this week we will be discussing the water cycle. If you joined me last week, we discussed animal and plant life cycles. So before we begin this week's session, let's review what we did last week. So to review, our warm-up for today is going to be a Jeopardy game, and this is going to go over the content that we reviewed during last week's session on life cycles. If you could grab your notebook, grab your notes, your pencil, and let's begin. So life cycle vocabulary for 100. What is the way a living thing grows, changes, and makes more living things itself and dies? That is called a life cycle. 200. What is the stage when a seed begins to grow and becomes a young plant? Correct again. That stage is called seedling. Life cycle for 300 is the animal that starts its life cycle as an egg. So what's the name of those animals? It could be more than one. Correct. Animals that typically start their life cycle as an egg could be an amphibian, a bird, a fish, an insect, or a reptile. Life cycle vocabulary for 400. What is the stretchy sac or bag in your body? Right, that bag is called your stomach. What is the part of your body that takes in information from your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, and your skin? Growth and change for 100. What do all living things have in common? Correct. All living things, they all grow, they change, and they eventually die. Again, a life cycle, our life cycle is composed of the stages or the changes that an organism goes throughout its life, from birth until death. Growth and change for 200. What would happen if no living things died? Yes, if they did not die, the world would be so crowded. We would be overcrowded, overpopulated, and there wouldn't be any room for anything living. And we would just be in competition with each other because we would run out of resources. There would not be enough resources for all of the living things on Earth. Growth and change for 300. True or false? In direct development, the offspring are never in an egg. Right. This question is false. Birds are an example of direct development organism that is born in the egg. So when the bird comes out of the egg, it looks like a bird, like a little bird, but it's still a bird. How is the life cycle of animals and humans alike? So the life cycle of all animals and humans, they include being born or hatching, growth and change, making more living things like themselves, and then death. So basically, although we might not go through the exact same steps, we have the broader steps that we all go through. We all are born, we all grow and change, and then we die. Growth and change for 500. How does a family change from year to year? Yes, a family changes from year to year. Babies become children, then teenagers, then adult. New babies may be born and some family members may die. So again, that cycle of birth and death. And within that, or in the middle of birth and death, is growth and change. Plant growth for 100. What could stop the life cycle of a tree? Yes. So what could happen is the tree could die, perhaps by being chopped down or falling down naturally. Plant growth for 200. What are the 4 ways that plants can begin their life cycle? Right. So they begin their life cycle with seeds, spores, or buds. Plant growth for 300. How do plant seeds compare to the adult seeds that make them? Correct again. So those seeds, they are much smaller and different colors. So inside each seed is the beginning of the same kind of plant as an adult. So what happens to a pea seed after it germinates? It'll grow first into a seedling, then a larger plant, and then make flowers and seeds of its own. Plant growth for 500. Every pumpkin has many seeds. Why aren't there more pumpkin plants? Well, the reason is because not every seed grows into a new plant. Plant and animals 100. Do plants and animals live for the same amount of time? What is no? So some live for a short time, others live for a long time. It just really depends on that animal and the complexity of their body and how their body works and their environment. So there are multiple factors that go into place to determine the lifetime of an organism. What are the 4 stages in the life cycle of a frog? Yes, those stages are egg, tadpole, froglet, young frog, and then adult frog. What are the 4 stages of a butterfly? Correct again. They are egg, larva, pupal, and butterfly. For 400, how does chrysalis help a butterfly during the pupal stage? It provides them with a safe place for them to change into an adult. Plants and animals for 500. How is the life cycle of a frog like that of a chicken? And how is it different? So both life cycles, they include eggs, they hatch into young animals. But the bodies of tadpoles change a lot to move on land and become adults. Chicks grow larger, but do not change as much to become adult chicken. And then life cycle investigation for 100. So how do temperatures affect the life cycle of a butterfly over time? So we observe the butterflies at different temperatures. And so we're going to stop here and then get back into today's session on the water cycle. So our focus for today is explain how the sun and the ocean interact in the water cycle. So the essential question I have for you is, how does the water cycle change states as it travels through the water cycle? So the agenda that we have for today, water cycle foldable, water cycle sort, independent practice, a quiz is, and then as always, some STAR practice questions to get us prepared for the STAR assessment. It does not end till June. So if you are a student that wants to take the STAR assessment, you have until June. So we're going to continue to practice for it. The materials you will need for this session just include paper, pencil, and scissors. And so let's just go right into it. So the water cycle. The water cycle is a continuous process of water cycling through the earth and the atmosphere. So water is always cycling, even if we don't see it, right? It's always cycling. So that means that there is no beginning or end. And that's because it really is like a circle. And if you've seen a circle before, as you can see, there isn't a beginning or an end. We just keep going in the circular path. So steps to the water cycle, and we're going to talk about them individually, but here are the steps: evaporation, condensation, precipitation, transpiration, and then runoff. And then here is a diagram that kind of shows you all of the stages in one working together. So let's start with evaporation. So evaporation is the process of liquid water turning into water vapor. And water vapor is just a fancy word for a gas. So the sun energy evaporates the water. And during this stage of evaporation, liquid is turned into a gas. Now, remember, one of the unique features of water is that it can go through all phases. So that's what we'll see during this water cycle. So we see that during the evaporation stage, liquid water is changed into a gas. So the next stage is condensation. So condensation is the process of that gas that we created during evaporation turning back into liquid water. And so it is formed in the clouds. And again, this is the stage of going from a gas to a liquid. And so just to review, evaporation is when we went from a liquid, what we drink, to a gas. Condensation, on the other hand, is when we basically reverse it and we go from the gas that we created back to a liquid. And again, this happens in the clouds. Now, our third stage is precipitation. And this is the process of liquid water falling back to earth. So remember, evaporation is when water goes into the atmosphere. Condensation also occurs in the atmosphere in the clouds, and precipitation is when that water comes back to earth. So again, the water cycle components are made up of the earth and the atmosphere, and water transferring between the two. So there are 4 types of precipitation: water, snow, hail, and sleet. So those are the 4 ways that water goes from the atmosphere back to earth, either through rain, which is water, it's a liquid; snow, which is more like a solid; hail, again, a solid; and then sleet, a solid. So as you can see, when we talk about snow, hail, and sleet, the atmosphere is cold. So that's what's going to make precipitation coming back down to the earth a solid and not a liquid. Now, the next stage is transpiration. So transpiration is the process of plants releasing gas into the environment. And so leaves have tiny openings. And so the plants open and close, and they're able to release that gas back into the atmosphere. Because again, the water cycle really deals with the earth and the atmosphere, and transferring water from earth to the atmosphere, and then from the atmosphere back to earth. So plants help get water back into the atmosphere through transpiration. And then our final stage we're going to discuss today is runoff. So it is the process of water flowing back to rivers, lakes, and oceans. Now, as you can see, again, this is the picture that we initially started with. So transpiration, the plants having water vapor leave, and then or evaporation. So transpiration and evaporation, very similar. The difference is where it initiates. Transpiration it initiates in the plants. Evaporation most likely initiates from a river, a lake, and an ocean. Now, once we are finished with the transpiration and evaporation stage, we then proceed to the condensation stage. The condensation stage occurs in the atmosphere. During this stage, water or that gas is turned back into a liquid. And then after we have our water in the atmosphere, we have to bring it back down to earth. The way we bring it back down to earth is through precipitation. And again, there are 4 ways or 4 different types of precipitation. Now, if we're going to see a liquid precipitation or a solid precipitation depends on the temperature. So colder temperatures are going to give us precipitation that's more like a solid, snow and hail. Warmer temperatures are going to give us a precipitation like rain. And then the last stage again is runoff, and runoff will bring water back into our lakes and oceans so that it can evaporate again, and we can start this process all over. Because remember, the water cycle is a circular movement. So there is no beginning or end. It just keeps going in a circle over and over. So these processes or these stages, they never end. They just keep happening over and over. In fact, they're happening right now while you're watching me on your screen. So let's practice. I'm going to read off the definitions, and we're going to decide which stage of the water cycle is the description describing. All right, so our first definition says the process in which plants release water vapor into the atmosphere. And again, we have our 5 stages here: evaporation, precipitation, condensation, transpiration, and runoff. So again, that first definition is the process in which plants release water vapor into the atmosphere. So out of these 5, which one matches with this definition? Yes, when the key word here is plants. So that means that the definition or the correct word is going to be transpiration. Very good. Let's look at the second definition: the process of liquid water turning into water vapor. And remember, water vapor is just a fancy word for gas. So would it be evaporation, precipitation, runoff, or condensation? Yes, going from the liquid to the gas phase, that is called evaporation. The next one states the process of water vapor turning into liquid water forming in the clouds. So do you see any key words that help us out? Yes, a key word would be clouds. But another key part of this statement would be the fact that it's going from a liquid to a gas. So are we talking about precipitation, runoff, or condensation? Yes, condensation occurs in the clouds and is when water is changed from a gas back into a liquid. Number 5 states when water falls from the atmosphere back into the Earth's surface. Any key words here? Yes, coming back to the atmosphere is key. It definitely will help us to decide if this is describing precipitation or runoff. So which one do you think it is? Yes. When water comes back to the earth, we call that precipitation. And remember, there are 4 types of precipitation. The type of precipitation that we receive on earth or in Houston will depend on the temperature. And then the last one, the process of water returning back to lakes, rivers, and oceans. We only have one word left, so we know that that is runoff. So just to review, transpiration is the process in which plants release water vapor into the atmosphere. Evaporation is the process of liquid water turning into water vapor. Condensation is the process of water vapor turning into liquid water, forming clouds. And precipitation is when water falls from the atmosphere back onto the Earth's surface. And last but not least, runoff is the process of water returning back to lakes, rivers, and oceans. All right, so now that we know the definitions, we should be able to correctly identify the stages in a diagram. So we're going to drag the steps of the water cycle to the correct spot on the image. Again, we have different stages here, all 5. One we have twice. So we have evaporation, condensation, precipitation, transpiration, and then we have runoff twice. So let's start with here. All right, so here we see these arrows. What are these arrows indicating that the water is doing? Yes, so these red arrows are indicating that the water is moving up. So if water is moving up, can it move up in its liquid phase? No, in its liquid phase, water cannot move up. So in order for water to move up, it must change from a liquid to a gas. So if we start with this one where we're looking at this kind of stream, river, then what stage would this be in a water cycle where water is changing from a liquid to a gas and the water is coming from a stream or a river? Right. This stage would be called evaporation. Now, as we can see, the diagram or the blank circle next to it also has those arrows pointing up. So again, we know that water is moving to the atmosphere. We also know that in order for water to move to the atmosphere, it must be in a gas stage. But this time we see that the arrows are coming from the leaves. So what is the stage of the water cycle where water is changed from a liquid to a gas, but occurs in plants, or in this case, a tree? Yes, that would be transpiration. All right. So now that we have our water change from a liquid to a gas, we're going to move to the next stage. And now, as you can see, this black circle is located over the clouds. This is the stage where water is changed from a gas to a liquid in the clouds. Do you remember what the name of that stage would be? Right. The name of that stage is condensation. And then going to our next stage. So in this stage, now that we have changed water from a gas back to a liquid, it's getting heavy and it needs to be released. So what do we call it when water returns back to the earth from the atmosphere? Yes, we call that stage precipitation. And so now that water is returning back to the earth, we also will have some water that returns to the oceans, to the lakes, off of mountains and hills, and we call that runoff. So here are the stages of the water cycle. Again, evaporation and transpiration, both have water turning from a liquid to a gas so that that water can go into the atmosphere. The only difference between the two is where they originate from. Transpiration originates from a plant or a tree, and evaporation originates from water, typically found in an ocean, a lake, or a river. After we finish with the evaporation and transpiration stage, we then move on to the condensation stage. In this stage, this is where water is transferred from a gas back to its liquid stage. And then after the condensation stage, we go to the precipitation stage, which the water is returned back to Earth, and it can get back into its oceans, into its rivers through a process called runoff. So now we're going to move on to our quiz is for today. Blank is when rainwater flows downhill towards a body of water. Yes, that would be called runoff. What part of the water cycle does this picture show? Yes, this picture shows condensation. Precipitation happens when clouds of water droplets are two. So why is precipitation happening? So what is the cause of it? Correct. Precipitation is occurring because the clouds or the water droplets, they're too heavy. Letter B is representing what part of the water cycle? And letter B is right here. So what part of the water cycle is letter B representing? My face is kind of in the way, so that would be condensation. 5, evaporation happens when the sun blank water and turns into vapor. Yes, in order to get that water to go back into the atmosphere or to go into the atmosphere, that water has to change from a liquid to a gas. And in order to get to change from a liquid to a gas, we have to heat it up. Think about you in a shower, how you get the steam. How does the water cycle begin? Yes, so the water cycle begins with the sun's energy. Blank is when the sun's heat causes liquid water to become water vapor. So blank, and I'll read that one more time. Blank is when the sun's heat causes liquid water to become water vapor. So changing from a liquid to a gas. What stage are we describing right now? Yes, we are describing evaporation. Number 8, which of these is an example of precipitation? Yes, so there are 4 types of precipitation. The one that we see on our screen right now, the correct answer is a solid form of precipitation, and it is called snow. What is it called when plants give off water vapor as a waste product? Yes, so when plants release that gas back into the atmosphere, we call that transpiration. What part of the water cycle does this picture show? Again, those arrows are moving up, so we know that it is what stage? Yes, we know that it is evaporation. Letter C is representing what part of the water cycle? Yes, the part of the water cycle that C is representing is called precipitation. Blank is when water vapor releases from the leaves of plants. Yes, so when water vapor leaves the plants, we call that transpiration. Snow, sleet, hail, and rain are all forms of? Yes, snow, sleet, and hail are the solid forms. Rain is the liquid forms, but no matter what, they're all forms of precipitation. All right, so we're going to end today's session with our STAR practice questions. And so the question that we have for you today, or that I have for you today, which of the following explains how water undergoes a change of state in one stage of the water cycle in order to move from the ocean surface in the air? All right. And we have 4 choices. The first choice is F, liquid water that is heated by the sun becomes a gas and rises. G, gaseous water rises as it cooled by the ocean. H, liquid water that is heated by the sun condenses into rain. And then J, the gaseous water collects in drops of fog above the ocean surface. So I'm going to read the question one more time. Which of the following explains how water undergoes a change of state in one stage of the water cycle in order to move from ocean surface into the air? So now that we have read this question twice, can you tell me a key statement or a key part of the question that will help us come up with the correct answer? Yes. So a key part to this question is basically the end of the question. So where it says, in order to move from the ocean surface into the air. So that's the specific part of the water cycle that we're discussing today, how it moves from the ocean surface. So from the ocean back into the air. Now, again, what stage is this typically called when water moves from the ocean into the air? Yes, that stage is called evaporation. And so that means we need to find an answer choice that describes evaporation. So can you tell me an answer choice first that we know does not describe evaporation? Yes. So H, liquid water is heated up by the sun and condenses into rain. That definitely is not a correct description of evaporation. So we know that H is not the answer. So what is the correct answer to this question? Correct. The correct definition to this, or the correct answer to this question, the correct definition of evaporation is letter F. Liquid water that is heated by the sun becomes a gas and it rises. So that's how we get water from the ocean back into the atmosphere. Again, that letter is F. Well, that is everything I have for you today. Have a awesome week. And this is the end of our series. So thank you so much for joining me all year long. And I hope you have a great summer and we will see you next school year. Bye-bye.